We have, I think, 30 minutes now for a discussion between the panelists, and we've also had some questions in from delegates too, which is fantastic. So some of those are pretty specific. It may well be, Josh, Keerthi, that we follow up in writing on some of those more specific queries. But there are some really good general points in there that we can cover in the next half an hour. Keerthi, you may have seen me smiling when you said, I think you used the words fuzzy and vague at least twice in the context of lawyers and the contracts we put together.
Apologies, no offense.
No, I'm joking. I think in many ways the perception is that a negotiated contract, and you and Josh have both referred to this. There's always a compromise for both parties or all parties to a contract, and they end up sometimes being longer or more complex than anyone envisaged at the time. I think your point about the coders doing the coding and the lawyers doing the lawyering is really important, because I think I can see situations in the future where code is created by technologists which aims to do something which doesn't quite work from a legal perspective. And from the opposite perspective, lawyers shouldn't be and don't dabble in code. So I think that whole piece about joint working between the lawyers and the technologists is something that we've demonstrated through the Weather Ledger project. Works really seamlessly, and it is about clarity of objectives and clarity of roles actually. Leading from that then, Josh, I'll ask you a question to start with. Do you think that the success of the Weather Ledger will lead to greater uptake in short order across the whole of the construction industry of smart contracting solutions? What's your sense of kind of where the market is and the readiness of the market for these types of solutions, please?
Yeah, no, cheers, David. I think, kind of like I alluded to, the clients and contractors who we're having discussions with, and that's within the consortium and external to the consortium as well. They get it. I think they get it, and so all it takes really is some, I don't want to call them brave, but some companies who want to say, yeah, actually, we want that to be a competitive advantage. We want that to be something that can bring us benefit and can. So I don't know what the percentage of the market is who's ready for that, but it certainly seems like there are clients and contractors who, because although you said, in the traditional world, there are compromises that have to be made. We're just making the compromises up front here. It's not that those compromises are going away. It's just that we're stating them in a codified way. And so you still have to have that conversation. And that's, of course, why the lawyers still need to be involved. It's just you do all of that compromising up front. But I think the benefit of that is that you have certainty going into a project. Because I can imagine the worst thing in the world is you're sitting there on a site, it's starting to pour with rain, and you're like, is this going to be a decade-long compensation event that I'm now going to have to, because that anecdotally, we've been told that, some of these go on for years. There's one that has gone on for 11 years. So, that is clearly a considerable risk that you don't want on your books or what have you. So in answer to your question, I think I hope so. And from what I can see, yeah, there's definitely going to be opportunities in the future.
Thank you. And then, Keerthi, to bring you in, from a technology perspective, what limitations do you think there are with the current technology to prevent whole-scale uptake of these types of smart contract solutions?
I think from the challenge is not so much on the technical side, David. It's more on the governance side, because distributed ledger technology is something where all of the parties, all of the participants need to have a stake in it, and they all have to agree to working on the solution or accepting the solution. and utilizing it. If one of them is disinterested, or one of them is doesn't want to cooperate, that's when the distributed system falls apart. And that's why it's so difficult for a company to have solutions that where they can control end to end. It's much more easier for them to actually make it work. Whereas distributed ledger system requires all of the participants equally working and making the solution. And that's where I think there needs to be a cultural shift I think here in Weather Ledger it's getting to work, where you find there's no, you don't have this adversarial feeling. There's more of let me put it this way: the trust needs to be distributed. There is no lack of trust. The trust needs to be distributed equally across for all participants to contribute and make the solution and adapt the solution and make the solution to work.
And I guess
I think that's a huge challenge.
And I guess where you've got two parties that may not be seeing eye to eye in a dispute context, for example, that trust can be in short supply. So I guess the next stage of that journey is then how can the technology help to potentially mediate or moderate each party's perspective. I think that has a massive impact on the potential to manage more in a more streamlined way what are often long-term, as Josh says, construction disputes. Josh, just bringing you in on that, do you think that cultural shift is something that you've seen through your discussions around the Weather Ledger? Do you think that you talk about key partners, obviously, outside of the immediate delivery group that you've been talking to? Do you think there is that appetite for that cultural shift? Do you think this is the right sort of trigger for it?
I think absolutely. I think there's just so many companies, and maybe it's a small percentage, but there are so many companies who are starting to just realize what has been said for years, right? That there's a huge wave of innovation coming to construction. Clearly, blockchain smart contracts is a technology and it can have benefit, and so therefore it's part of that. And ultimately, it's the classic bell curve, right? There's some early adopters, there's some innovators, there's some early adopters, there'll be some late adopters. We are somewhere in that process.
Yeah.
So yeah, absolutely.
Great. And then Keerthi, linked to that and picking up one of the questions we've had from a delegate. From a technological perspective, what are your thoughts around this question, which is the most recent one we've had? Are we limited by blockchain scalability and generally low throughput in the context of data from sensors? What are the technological challenges around scalability and the data quality?
Sure. Actually, scalability is not an issue right now because, okay, we've in the past we've been limited by public blockchains like Ethereum and so on. Even Ethereum will move towards a more optimized and scalable solution in the future. But there have been other technical innovations in the space that give us reasonably good high throughput in terms of a number of transactions per second, or even in the number of partners that can be onboarded on the blockchain to facilitate and to actually have a working solution. I mean, in this case, we've been using Hyperledger Fabric, but we could very easily use other more sleek custom chains like Substrate that gives you high throughput. But even then, even looking at the current data, what we have right now is good enough to go. It's not an issue. It's not a technical issue per se. It's more, as I said, more on the governance side of things.
You're muted, David. I'm afraid. Didn't catch
Yeah,
that.
David, yeah.
It was all going so well. I mean, so I think that's really interesting that scalability is not an issue at this stage, but I guess it might be in the future. I suppose linked to that, another question that we've had in for Delegate this afternoon is, to what extent do you think, Keerthi, that blockchain is efficient for kind of predictive analysis? So this is that link between the DLT and data analytics and taking, I guess, what's happened before in terms of weather, a good example. How good is the overlay or the interface between the kind of the data analysis and using the DLT?
Sure. I mean, the AI bit not necessarily has to interface with the blockchain part. What we can do with the data that's stored on the blockchain, or that's been collected from the sensors, I think that's where we're looking at, and that's where we are trying to use the AI bit. Is if, for example, I mean, this is a very it's an outlier basically. What if somebody poured a water over your sensor to simulate a high amount of rainfall? I mean, this is clearly trying to sabotage a system. So if we had, if we been able to run the data through an AI, you will be able to know, okay, this is really abnormal because the previous data suggests that this is not normal. And we should also, I mean, we might be able to at some point in time instrument sites with many sensors. Right now, the sensors are quite expensive with, being at 2000K per piece. But as and when these sensors become cheaper and we are able to deploy them in scale, I think the reliability of data collected will become much more. It'll become much more easier to achieve. Right now, we are kind of relying on some external techniques, but I think as we get more sensors on board and as we try to use more of AI, we might be able to catch these fake or let's say, if a system is sabotaged, we'll be able to detect it quite easily. Yeah, and those fail-safes will depend on the project, won't they, as well, in practice, as to whether or not there are third-party assessments of the intensity of particular weather events, etc. And I guess the interface there is using meteorological data and using weather forecasting, actually, help to give advance warning to contractors about impending bad weather. That's great, thank you. Josh, there's a technical question which has come in, which I'd like to ask you, which is go back to your presentation. Is there a storage layer between step one, which was sensors or machine to capture data, and step two, DLT to share information? I think that's particularly focusing on, isn't it, the maintaining the data security and data integrity. Is that a question that you could answer, just going back to your presentation?
Yeah, so right now we're using a middleware piece which is called the WASP platform, which the Digital Catapult have built, which interfaces with the IoT device. But what, like Keerthi alluded to or mentioned even, we do have a process which basically checks the validity of the data to check where it's coming from. And we do that for whether it's data coming from the device or if it's data coming from the Met Office, we check the author of that information, I suppose, to ensure that it matches with where we expect that to be coming from. But obviously, as we move to create this into a production-ready tool, we'll have to migrate away from the WASP platform. Because you'll know more than me, Keerthi, but that platform is quite, it's experimental by its nature for this exact reason. So we'll have to make sure that we build something as robust, if not more robust, as we move to production.
Thank you. Keerthi, do you have any comments on what Josh just said?
He is perfectly right. We need to build a more robust platform, and this is what I was trying to allude to even in Oracleization. But right now, that we don't have end-to-end security of the pipeline, of the data pipeline, and how the data is sensed to how it's been consumed. I think that requires some amount of reworking and ensuring that it's it is what it is, and it is not something else. Ensuring the data integrity, I think that's really the key.
Yeah, as is the case under a traditional contract where data is drawn from different sources and is used to deal with and assess these types of issues. The outcome is only as good as the data which is fed in, which I think is a point you made, Keerthi, in your excellent presentation. So as a sort of taking a step out of the specific questions that we've had in from our virtual audience, Josh, what's next? What's on the horizon in terms of Weather Ledger and beyond?
Well, I think there's really sort of two steps that I am seeing at the moment, and that is obviously making the system that we currently are proving works in the setup that we currently have it in, is getting that to a production ready system. Because I'll just let you in on one of the challenges that we faced. One of our sensors had a faulty bit of equipment inside it, and so it meant that it was shorting and draining the battery faster than expected. And therefore, we lost some data. And clearly, in a production system, you would want redundancy, you would want additional ways of storing that information, or at the very least, you would probably have written into your contract, if such and such solution fails, we default to other such and such, Met Office station X miles away, perhaps. But that's the whole point of this, is to understand and find out what those challenges could bring. And obviously we're 100% focused on figuring these problems out. The next step for us is kind of that smart policy piece that I briefly mentioned, which is applying the same learnings to another part of the weather risk puzzle, if you like, and it sits on that same, as I said, dashboard, or something where people can understand, okay, the contract is helping the contract to transfer risk to the client, but maybe there's an additional party, the insurer, that you could bring into that risk sharing process to make it even more robust. We'll be working actually with, I think, Exeter Uni, doing a little bit of research with one of their researchers to try to understand further what those benefits could be.
Excellent. And then Keerthi, to bring you in to that, what's next in terms of from the technologist's perspective? What's the next opportunity that you can see, or the next thing that you're focused on?
I mean, if we just keep the smart legal contract piece aside, like Josh was saying about all the kind of issues they face with, even deploying the sensors, maintaining the sensors, who has to go and change the battery, or who has to go and fix this technical device. We need to find poles to mount those sensors. I mean, there are a whole loads of questions on that deals with deploying the sensors, maintaining the sensors, and making sure the data is available. I think that itself will become a kind of a trusted data service provider. And it might be an independent provider who will just facilitate businesses like EHAB. I would think that there might be in the future where all you need is to just call them up and say, hey, deploy the sensors on a site, and the sensors, or the latest sensors, are deployed, maintained, and removed once the construction is finished. All those are not things businesses like EHAB should be dealing with. And I think there's an opportunity, a business opportunity, as it were. And in terms of smart legal contract itself, I think we are moving at a very slow pace, and in terms of implementing, considering that there's so much of interest even on our ECHAB project, but we still don't have a production system where a smart legal contract is used. So I think it may not be possible to implement the whole contract like NEC contract, but I think we'll find more smarter contracts, I think, will evolve with expertise from Clyde Co and so on to actually come up with smart clauses and smart contracts, the real ones, in the future. I think that would be exciting.
Keith, I have just a question. I'm aware of the time, but a question about how do you, what sort of sensors are you planning to use? And did you consider other sources of information like image analysis, for example?
Sorry, image analysis for the geographic location, or I'm sorry, I didn't
for weather forecast.
Oh, I see. Actually, that's a very good point. Can we actually have some weather images or to be used as a kind of a proof and even analyze? I think we haven't done that yet. We haven't seen it so far. But actually, you make a very good point. We might be able to look up and see if that can be tapped into. Right now, we are just using LoRaWAN sensors, weather sensors, that gives us more parameters than the Met Office right now. I think, as we said, we are only taking baby steps to first try and get this working.
Okay, thank you.
And linked to that, Keerthi, question that we've had in is about the use of drones. So I alluded in my 20 minutes to parametric insurance products linked to drones that can monitor ships at sea or monitor construction sites. So we've talked about the sensor technology, etc. But to what extent do we think that drone technology, in terms of providing real-time, perhaps movable sensors, is something which we haven't seen yet outside of insurance, really?
Actually, this type of technology. Sorry, is it for me or for?
Yeah, we'll start with you. That's good.
Actually, what you're saying is brilliant, David. Actually, I come from academia, and we have been looking at something like a drone going and fetching information, because sometimes humans can't. For example, you have a site that is 100 miles or 100 kilometers, it stretches 100 kilometers, and you can't deploy sensors all across. So can you actually send a drone to do a few trips and get the data you want? And actually, it might be a very brilliant solution to implement. And I see no reason why it shouldn't be used. So yes, that has a very good prospect in my view.
And Josh, to bring you in there, do you have any comments around the use of drones in these types of solutions?
Well, I'll just answer as well a little bit Abel's question. So we have done a little bit of digging into the image analysis as well, and I think the issue with that and with drones is that it sounds incredible, right? It sounds like the future, but the practicalities of, okay, basically what we need to do is this has to be something that works and that construction companies believe. Because otherwise they'll say, oh, nice idea, but actually we're happy with the current solution. So unfortunately, we have to work with whatever the most robust set of tools are in front of us. And for us right now, that looks like some LoRaWAN sensors with some batteries, with good life, and the Accord project. I have no doubt that as all of these other technologies continue to mature, that we can build even smarter things. And I would love for the EHAB platform to have a drone integration, but I'm not going to get too excited and ahead of myself.
But yeah, I'm just thinking, it's interesting. I'm just thinking about value for money, because it seems like the industry is working towards putting cameras everywhere on sites. So the camera is very good to identify people and give like an index of health and safety on that particular site. We have tools out there doing that. Can you spot who is wearing health and safety gear and who is not, and even send a message to that person and say, oh, you didn't put your health and safety gear today, etc. But it can also do some predictives that are now far superior than human cognition. So you can get a fragment of an image and construct the rest of the image based on some machine learning analysis of that fragment. So I see this very like a very direct translation of this to weather forecast. But yeah, I mean, because the cameras will be there, I'm just wondering if you can get more out of them.
Mm.
But yeah, I understand the, you know, people not believing. They will not believe until they believe.
So we've got, thank you, Abel. We've got 4 minutes left of our half an hour. I'm very conscious not to overrun, but what I'm going to do in a moment is ask each of the panelists just in 60 seconds or less to sum up what their number one takeaway would be from this part of the afternoon for delegates. From my perspective, what I think is the key is to recognise, I think, that the interplay between the smart contract in technological terms and what it does and what it seeks to do legally require to be joined up at the start of any smart contracting project. There's lots of talk about retrofitting existing contracts with smart contracting solutions. It is possible through smart clause or other things to do that, but you have to look at the contract in the round. You have to make sure that it works in the round. I think the other thing we haven't talked about at all today, and I'd really like us to perhaps think about for next year or through another forum, is the extent to which DLT, blockchain technology, can be used in the procurement process. So before the contractor has been identified. We've talked today, obviously, in the context of NEC3, with construction contract, that presupposes that there is a contractor appointed. We've had a number of questions come through from delegates, and obviously part of my day job is as a procurement lawyer. So the whole supply chain management piece, I think my takeaway from today is that there's so much here that we can build on through the success of the Weather Ledger. And that sounds to me to be a pretty great topic. Keerthi, can I ask you to sum up in similarly in 60 seconds what your key takeaway is from what we've heard?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it would be, I think instead of, I'm only going to speak from the blockchain side of things. Instead of trying to make bombastic claims and trying to achieve something supernatural, I think if we try to solve small incremental steps and make solutions that are addressing real world problems, I think that's the way forward, rather than trying to do something that's not achievable, and using the best technology available, but more realistically address a real world problem and distribute trust and address governance issues from a technical side of things to make a solution work.
Excellent. And then Josh, your thoughts in terms of a takeaway from the half.
Yeah, thanks, David. Collaboration, I think, is just so key. We've all said it multiple times, and you know, without really effective collaboration, then the Weather Ledger project wouldn't be happening. And I think, you know, that's the only way that you get things, because you can go away and tinker and build some tech somewhere, or you can get a contractor to like come up with a problem space that they really want addressed. But without all of the different parts fitting in, the legal, the innovation, the industry experts, then it becomes very hard to actually come up with a solution that is able to even become production ready. So yeah, I think I just thank you so much to all of our partners, and equally any other partners who are out there. Like, we're always open to chatting, because that's again how the solution is going to continue to evolve.
Excellent, thank you. And then for completeness, Abel, Leo, is there anything that you would note or comment on what you've heard in the last hour and a half before I hand back to Leo for the remainder of the afternoon?
I agree. I think collaboration it's key. I think blockchain is in essence a technology that enables collaboration in this trustless format that you just run the technology and it will automatically improve collaboration processes. So I think this is quite key. And also modulating using the technology, like the Weather Ledger project is quite interesting as a device to modulate data and mobilize that data and extract some value for processes.